He found the gods would quieter in autumn than in spring, as if the trees themselves had learned to hush their rustlings for fear of announcing their names to the wind. The leaves were crusted with frost at their bitten edges. The colors had long since darkened from the tart reds of harvest to a deep, bruised wine. The heart tree kept to its own thoughts. Its pale face watched the pool without moving, without judging, and the pool gave back a tight-lipped skin of light where the sky peered through bare branches. Pewter at noon and pewter now, though the afternoon was only beginning to lean toward evening. Theon came here because the castle sounded unusually human everywhere else. Kettles clanging and girls laughing and boys scuffling and dogs barking at their own cleverness. He came because he had no prayer to offer and liked that the god of the place never seemed to ask for one. He rested his forearms on his knees and his elbows on his thighs, hunched on the mossy root with the familiarity of an old perch. The air smelled of cold water and bark, and somewhere distant a rook in the pines repeated the same soft word to itself. He could still feel the weight of the bowstring across his fingers from that morning's practice with Bran. He had teased the boy for drawing his elbow like a cat curling to sleep and made him do it again and again until the motion smoothed out. Summer had watched every arrow with a fixed, yellow patience that had not been precisely comforting. He was not, he told himself, hiding. Men like him did not hide, least of all in a place like this, with its white-eyed witness and its silence like the hand of an old father on the shoulder. He had no father here. He had one somewhere else, across gray water and knives of wind, but no father among these cold trees. What he had were promises, the sort that a man speaks as if he is already underwater and the words bob up one at a time to the surface. Keep the boy's confidence. Keep the castle's heart beating. Keep the North's faith in itself until the North returns. There was a habit to loyalty that surprised him, how it had to be built and then rebuilt out of simple fibers. Show up to the yard before the boys. Walk the ring yourself where Bran will walk. Check the fletchings yourself. Ask the steward to make the grain measures twice and then once again in the hall as if you were a merchant and numbers were the only banners you followed. No one had told him that fidelity takes smallness, the humility of counting and correcting. No one had told him that it had a taste. The taste of iron on the tongue when you're biting your own cheek so you don't say the smooth thing that would let the day go easier and make you feel large for an hour. He liked feeling large. He liked the smirk and the quip and the way lads would look at him and girls would look away and then look back, their eyes bright with scorn and curiosity mixed. He had come to the slow realization that the castle saw through all that. You could strut in the yard as if you owned it, and the yard, in answer, would present you with a fraying rope, a stubborn mule, a boy with a limp who would not be hurried, a gate hinge that wanted a particular grease and would groan like a winter-broken reed if you gave it anything else. Winterfell was a schoolmaster with switch in hand and love in its eyes, and Theon, who had thought himself done with schooling, found, to his own surprise, that he would rather its lessons than any other. He understood, as the breeze caught the last few leaves that clung to a nearby elm and made them tremble in place, that he wanted Winterfell to approve of him. The notion was childish and maddening and true. He leaned back, lifting his gaze to the carved face that was not a face, and said into the quiet, "Mind me." The word fogged in the air and blew apart. He almost laughed. The heart tree had witnessed the unburdenings of better men. He felt, then, how thin his neck was, how easily a chopping block might fit his throat. Footsteps made a crisp music on the leaf litter behind him. He knew the tramp as well as the little cough that meant the owner sought to announce himself without presuming. "Ser Rodrik," Theon said without turning. "You look for me because the hinge on the south gate has acquired a personal vendetta, or because the boy is hungry at an ungodly hour and wishes for someone to curse with him while we wait for the cook." Ser Rodrik came up beside him and lowered himself to sit with a slow, careful dignity that made Theon think of war horses drinking, all nostril and eye and consideration. It was not in Roderick's nature to intrude on another man's solitude without feeling sorry for it. The old knight inclined his head, the thick, salt and pepper whiskers bristling around his mouth like late-season wheat. "Bran eats like any boy who grows to fill a seat he didn't expect," Roderick said, "and the south gate is perfectly resigned to the lash of its fate." It was Luwin's raven. Theon sucked on his teeth and looked at the pool until his eyes filmed with the reflected brightness, forcing him to blink. He sent for me? He asked that all who share stewardship for the castle be present if possible for the reading. He has a seal not often used. Roderick waited a beat. From Seaguard, Lord Mallister writes with haste. Another wind from the west, Theon said. We should build higher walls there and put posts in the sea and hands in the mouths of the waves. They keep trying their teeth. You knew this would be so? Roderick replied mildly. Toes get cold. Grown men say that toes are useless and look for ways to warm their hands. Is that a Northman proverb or something you thought up because you were short of proverbs? Theon asked, smiling before the smile could get away from him. He stood and dusted his breeches with both palms, letting the damp moss stain them where the knees had pressed. By all means, let's go hear old birds complain about new bee. Birds. They walked out of the godswood together, passing under the rough arched gate that still bore needle scars where generations of boys had honed their little blades. The sounds of the outer world returned with the path. Men laughing from the practice yard, the rhythmic thump of a flail in the grain barn, the squeal of a child outrunning a nurse. Winterfell was full today, fuller than it had been a year ago when summer had seemed a possession and not a rumor. Those who could afford to winter within walls had trickled in early, spooked by tales of reavers and fires along the western coasts. Those who could not afford it had come anyway and brought the only coin that mattered to the castle, hands that could be set to ropes and brooms and saws. Theon saw in it an answer to a question the North had always been asking itself. Is a place a household or a wall? Winterfell, cleverly, was both. They were nearly to the maester's turret when Bran swept past them in his chair with Hodder trundling it as if it were a barrow of hay. Bran's cheeks were ruddy from the cold and the movement, his eyes bright and hungry in a way they had not been the year before. He saw Theon and grinned, tipping his head to his side so that the hair fell artfully across his brow. It was not art, of course. He lived now in a new geometry of effort, where a shrug cost something measurable and a laugh had to be decided upon before it arrived. Theon had come to admire the boy's careful expenditures. Raven, Bran said without preface, as children speak when they are sure that everyone knows the same story as they do. Hodder? Quick, quick. Hodder? Hodder agreed, as solemn in assent as if he had been made a lord of the words he had. He pushed harder, long legs eating the ground in placid strides. Theon jogged to catch up, and Ser Roderick did not so much jog as gather himself, each pace a matter of honor and knees. The tower room was warm in the polite way of a room heated by a conscientious man who counts sticks of wood as if they were guests at table. Lewin had a kettle hung and cups laid out and a look in his eye that said he would have preferred that everyone enter in an orderly fashion and arrange themselves by age and dignity. Instead, Bran barreled, and Hodder navigated, and Theon flung himself into a chair with his usual grace and noise, and Roderick shut the door with a sigh that was a whole speech. Lewin made the adjustments to his face that he always made when his prayer for propriety went unanswered. He smiled, he bowed a little, he went on. The bird this morning came from Riverrun, he said. Good news. The young wolf's victories continue. I had meant to read you that. An hour later came this. He lifted a parchment sealed with a purple wax, the Mallister eagle impressed upon it. From Seaguard, Lord Jason writes that ironborn sails were sighted twice within a day's watch of the city. He credits our ravens with allowing him to move ships quickly enough to prevent landfall. The raiders retired without engaging. Theon felt his heart toss in his chest as if someone had tugged on it with a rope, the sort of lurch a skittish horse gives when it imagines a shadow has a sword in its hand. He put his elbows on his knees again and steepled his fingers as if this were a natural thing to do. And there are other sightings north and south, Lewin said. A handful, enough that a pattern might be guessed. Lord Jason's view is that a testing is underway, a measure of the shore. He advises prudence. He means he advises that we do nothing that takes men he might like at Seaguard, Theon said, more sharply than he'd intended. He caught the look in Lewin's eyes and shook his head. I don't say he's wrong. I say that prudence sounds like advice when you want it to be a command. Whatever its intent, it is sound counsel, Roderick observed. He took the empty chair as if its arms had grown none since the day he first sat in it. Our task is this and no other. Keep the boy safe, Keep the castle whole. Keep the people believing that their hall is a hearth at whose sides they may share in the warmth. We can do that by counting and mending and sharpening, not by chasing waves." Bran's mouth had set in the way it had when someone told him there was a thing he could not do, and Theon felt, unlawfully, given the age gulf between them, the boys looked like a conspiracy tug. It was a look that said, "I will do something eventually," not in childish tantrum but with a child's rightness. He surprised himself by not encouraging it. "Ser Roderick is right," Theon said, and heard how odd those words sounded in his mouth. He realized he had never said them before, not like that. He smiled to clean the taste. "We'll do the mad, brave thing another day, when it's Raven seen from Robb, and Lewin has 3 cups of milk of the poppy for courage." "Milk of the poppy is for pain," Bran said, managing a short, venomless glower. "And I'm not a boy to be kept from the yard like a lapdog." "No," Theon agreed, and there was no teasing in it. "You're to be worked like a gentleman, which is much worse." He leaned forward. "We double the watches on the north and west curtains, and I'll take the river gate tomorrow with Farlan. The dogs know when a man smells of brine. Let us see if they start to tell us something before the bells do." Lewin nodded, grateful for practicalities. His face softened into approval the way a cat's face softens when it hears cream poured into a bowl. "I have penned a letter to White Harbor for Lord Manderley," he said. "He will not take lecture from me. He will accept it from the evidence Lord Mallister already holds. We may ask that he ready ships that may catch what trespassers get past Seaguard's notice. If he replies in kind, we can set up a chain of ash and fire down the coast that would make landfall here the least attractive of choices." "And the Rills and Barrow Tun," Roderick added. "The Riswells and Dustons are no friends to sea wolves. If raiders should be rash enough to come ashore, there is land justice enough in those marshes to feed them for a year." Theon felt the old itch between the shoulder blades, the itch that had driven him from fires to hunts to beds to taverns, as if something rode him that could not be dismounted by any of those means. The prickling grew when he thought of the Iron Islands. It was not fear, though there was fear in it, but a recognition, as one recognizes the stride of a man who shares a blood tug with you. He could imagine their laugh when the oars dipped. He knew how they would spit and how they would sing, and how the least, ugliest of them would carry himself with the easy cruelty of a man who knows he shines in the eyes of those who taught him to measure value in loot and Christ's tears. He disliked that he knew these things. He was glad he knew them. He shut the door on the look that wanted to cross his face. Duty is a doorway. You can look out through it and see thieves. It is better to look at the grains in the wood. "Osha will walk the winter town with me this evening," he said. "I'd like her sense. She hears what I miss." Bran's brow cleared a little at the mention of Osha. The wildling had become a sort of compass for him, never pointing to true north, only to honest human north. The boy nodded. "Hodder will bear me to the yard after we've eaten," he declared. "I won't be left to the books. Today I loosed 12 arrows and hit with 6. 7, Theon corrected. "We will call the one that brushed the paint a hit, for the sake of the painter's feelings." "It brushed your boasting?" Bran retorted, quick enough to make Theon feel the wink of pride that always followed when a student mastered a retort before he mastered the thing itself. They drank Lewin's tea, which tasted like dried grass boiled in a pot that had once known honey and then forgotten it. Theon let the warmth roll down his throat and felt how the day already began to turn toward evening. There was livestock to be counted before the snow made men plainer by making their beasts hungrier. He walked out of the tower with Roderick, and they parted in the yard with a nod that had come, over the past months, to feel like masks exchanged at the door of a mask. A reminder that duty and affection are not the same thing, and all the sweeter for it. He found Osha near the kennels, arguing in a low, intense voice with Farlan about a dog's opinion. Osha's hair was a brown so dark it drank light. She wore it cut rough, and the wind had snatched it around her face and made a landscape of it. She had that way of standing with her weight slipped to one side that made you aware of where her knife would come from if it came. Theon marveled at the trick of her. This woman whom he had once presumed a child of treachery because she was from north of the wall, who now seemed to him to be truer than most men he had spent 3 years trying to befriend. "The bitch knows it," Farlan was insisting, a finger hooked toward the hound whose ears were half the size of Theon's hands. Smells something she doesn't love in the air. The bitch knows 3 things, Osha said. Hungry. Warmer than hungry. Something that isn't hungry but looks it. You turn any of those into a plan, Dogman, and I will sign my name to it in blood. Don't do that, Theon said, with the bright ease that got him forgiven for being himself. Maester Lewin is always complaining that he has to buy more ink when Osha has been signing things in blood again. We haven't the budget for it. Osha's mouth made a shape like a smile but kept its teeth hidden. You want the town or the wall? She asked without saluting or any of the little courtly nonsense. 2 sets of eyes tonight makes 2 truths, maybe. The town with you and the wall with me tomorrow, Theon answered. I want the sound of men at their last chores in my ear, and the smell of what they cook. The castle tells you its worries. The town tells you its lies. Usually they are the same. Farlan rolled his eyes and returned to his dogs, muttering to them in the secret language of men who live better with animals than with nobles. Osha fell in at Theon's right, and they walked out of the gates as the light grew simple. It was the hour when even a prosperous place looks honest. Fences show where they sag, chimneys where there's soot like bruises, and the faces of the people you watch are your own, if your own were scraped down to the bone and then built back up again with stubbornness. The winter town had the hopeful misery of any place built to be filled and then emptied. Lean-tos leaned more gratefully now that the first frosts had kissed their beams. Theon nodded to a cobbler who could not quite decide if he would not salute him or if he would wait to salute until another man had done it, and then pretend he had done it first. The smell of onions and cheap ale and wool and smoke was at once disgusting and friendly. A woman laughed from a doorway and made the sort of gesture with her chin that men pretend not to understand when they are young and then pretend to be too old for when they are older. Theon did not pretend either way. He tipped his fingers in a lazy benediction and did not go in. Osha watched him watch himself and said nothing. You've been in places like this, he remarked when they had gone 3 houses farther and the moon had lifted itself into the twigwork of the trees. Your whole life is a place like this. Worse, she replied, and quieter, and honest, at least to itself. This is the part of the world that thinks it will be saved because it can hear its neighbors dying and therefore believes that such courtesy will be extended to it. She glanced at him sideways, her mouth align. You plan to save it? Yes, he said, and was surprised by how the word felt. He put his hands behind his back to keep from gesturing the way he did when he wanted to explain a thing he had already decided. I plan to hold a castle. It's a thing with walls and fewer moods than most people, which makes it endearing. Holding it will save some. It will anger others. It may invite their attention like a red cloth invites a bull, but that's what I plan. You plan to be the red cloth, Osha said, not unkindly. She looked along the street where a boy ran in boots too big for him, his laughter cutting the cold like a knife that has just been sharpened. The bull will not notice that the cloth bleeds. The red cloth does not bleed, Theon said. Only the man holding it, if he's stupid. We'll try not to be stupid. He stopped at the butcher's, where the last of the day's fat was being gathered into a pan with a wooden scoop. Waste none, he said to the girl with the scoop, and she nodded at him with the solemn, impatient look of children whose day is being prolonged by instruction. They went on, and his mind found itself remembering ships that were not here and harbors that did not exist inland. He heard oars in his head in the pauses between footfalls. Osha, who listened as if her ears were as close together as a fox's and as far apart, caught him in it. They are yours, she observed. What are? The ones rowing in your skull. Don't look at me like a boy found pissing on the wrong tree, she said, not bothering to soften the disdain with humor. You know their eyebrows and they know your teeth. You were born among men who make the sea a hunger and call it a god. And you ask another god to mind you now, which is clever. Will you keep your wits when the noises in your head match the noises at the gate? He wanted to bridle, wanted it quickly, with his usual flair, but the question struck too close to the bone. Yes, he said, because you must say yes to the challenge that is waiting to hear you lie. He put his hand to his brow as if worried a bit of hair was out of place. I am a man who knows he was given to another house and grew up eating other people's food and wearing other people's manners like they were a cloak that only half fit. That makes me, what? A man who wants to be good at the place that kept him alive. A man who knows his father and chooses a different father. A man who will seem like a traitor to both for a time. He smiled at her and let the smile be honest and small and ugly. It makes me just like most men, if they'd say so. Osha snorted and then chuckled low. The sound like a whetstone kissed the right way. You make a good speech of being no one special, she said. Be the red cloth with a mind. Be the boy with a knife who learned which way the grain runs on a strap. There's been a lot of clever men who lost ears because they believed in their cleverness. Believe the dogs. I do, he said. I believe them the way I believe a count of coins after I've made it myself. Or the way I believe in a woman who laughs at me sober. He clapped her shoulder, and if she flinched it was only with the eye. Come on. Let's be seen being boring. Boring is a banner. They were seen. They were boring. They asked how much grain had been bought by the tanner and whether he meant to salt meat with that much already salted. They remarked on the weather in a way that was almost a threat. They agreed that such and such a boy should present himself tomorrow to Ser Roderick, who would make a spearman of him out of pity and laughter. They promised nothing and delivered a presence like a bench. Not comfortable, but always there when you went looking for it. They returned to the castle when the moon had gone a finger-width higher, and Theon felt that odd, grudging peace that comes after the clamor of desires has been replaced, for a few hours, with a ledger filled in. In the yard, boys were setting the targets back against the far wall, and Bran sat in his chair with Hodder behind him, patient as a gatepost and twice as strong. The torchlight made the strings of the bows shine like thin ropes drawn from water. Theon grinned to see Bran's jaw set over the arrow's notch. The wolf lay sprawled in the straw a few paces away, eyelids heavy, dreaming with his nose. Again, Theon called, because you always call again at the yard. Elbow up. Pretend you're a lord and your arm is a banner too lazy to learn the wind. Bran drew, resentful and eager in equal measure, and loosed. The arrow thunked into the straw's shoulder, not the painted ring. He hissed, annoyed with himself, and Theon noted with a little warmth, unembarrassed before the watchers. That was no small thing. A boy who could be angry with his failing without making it a performance. Again, Theon said, and moved behind him. He put 2 fingers along Bran's forearm and lifted it. Feel that lock. Here, in the shoulder. That's where a man lives. Not in the bicep. He avoided the word that would have come to his tongue too easily, cripple, and replaced it with nothing, with silence, with a carefulness. Let the back take it. Bran's second arrow hummed a little and entered the straw as if surprised to be invited. It was closer. Theon nodded. Good. Again. They worked until the torches were half burnt and the sweat on Bran's face dried and cooled and wet again, and the boy was composed. Not because he was unfeeling, but because he had learned to husband effort. Another form of wealth. Hodder shifted and shifted again, careful with his own weight the way an ox is in a field that has seen drought. After, they ate. The hall was noisy in the way of halls that are both too large and too loved. Sound finds corners there and wrestles with itself. The bench under Theon seemed to remember his weight and creaked a greeting. He ate as he had taught himself to eat in the last months. Enough to show vigor, not so much as to invite the sort of jokes he had once enjoyed making at other men's expense. He drank less than he wanted and listened more than his nature would have predicted. He heard of a sow that had farrowed too early and of a boy who had fallen off a cart and of a man who thought he had seen a light out on the west beyond the trees, high and errant as a star low to the earth's lip. He made a note in his head about the light and said nothing. He found himself missing Robb with a dull ache that had hardly anything to do with fear and everything to do with the way companionship, when it is good, gives you back a version of yourself you can stand. He had liked the way he and Robb were together when they were not trying to be anyone at all. Liked the idiot dares and the mock fights and the certainty that whatever stupid thing one had said the other would fold it up and tuck it away. Harmless. He had wanted to be for the boy what the boy had been for him. Only Theon had never had practice at that sort of service and had assumed, for a long time, that he must be the sparrowhawk forever and not the watchman. The watchman was a better work. It was quieter. It was harder to brag about and harder still to wear with a swagger. He found that this too appealed to some pride he had not known he possessed. The pride of a man who can watch without being seen watching and therefore keep men safe who will never know it. After supper, He sought the rookery with Luwin. The old man was trimming a quill with a care that spoke of peace between his fingers and his tools. "Lord Manderley will not answer quickly," he observed. "He is not a man to be hurried in any endeavor, including meals." "Then we will pursue what we can control," Theon answered. "We'll set lanterns along the battlements to be trimmed every hour, and show me that tally with the bell. I want the bell to do useful work. It's grown spoilt." Luwin's mouth twitched. Spoilt bells and the taming of lanterns. How soon we are reduced to household gods once we are deprived of the glamorous ones. He grew grave. "I have considered, too, that we might put trust in the crannogmen. They are often mocked by men who wish to sound as if they have learned something about war. They forget that constant insult teaches a man to surprise you." "Read," Theon mused. "They send boys to swear, and they send men to disappear. If the stony shore will be looked at, the neck will be sniffed also. I will write to Howland Reed Tun. No, I will compose a letter in the morning when I have not drunk Luwin's tea and thereby removed the skin from my tongue." The quill made its sly little whisper under Luwin's knife. "You have learned there is a morning," he said mildly, as if this were a compliment he gave rarely. Theon left him to his birds and went, as he had gone too often lately to be proud of it, to the crypts. He did not go as a penitent. He went as a student visiting the library at night because the book he needed did not like daylight. He passed the torches bracketed along the stairs without lighting them and let his eyes do the work. He could name the shapes of the kings by the hilt of the swords in their stone hands, by the curve of helms carved to fit them. He did not speak to dead men. He had not known how to talk to the living ones. Why would he pester rulers who had done their work and laid down their weapons without apology? But he stood a time at the blank spaces where there would someday be new stone, and he set his jaw, and he felt the precise weight of the burden he had taken up. You simply carry it. You grow strong where it rubs you raw, if you are lucky, and if you are not lucky you learn to carry it in blood. He ran his knuckles lightly along the corner of a step as he climbed back up, as if to take a splinter with him to prove he had been under the earth. For several days, nothing happened in the way that had a banner or a name. The nothing was not idle. It was vigorous. Fresh wheels were put under carts. The stock of arrows was counted twice, then thrice. A boy who could not hold a spear steady with his back got quizzed out of the ranks and set to binding arrows in the Fletcher's shed, where he learned that nothing steady in his bones was nothing lost if his hands could be quick. Theon, this surprised him sweetly and made him blush like a child who had been praised, found that men spoke his name to one another as if it were a tool that had done useful work and could be admired without risk. He took that knowledge like medicine, with a solemn face, and only Osha saw the little dance his eyes did before he shut them again. The light that the man had mentioned at supper appeared again. The boy at the gate, called Jory though he was not kin to the Jory who had served Eddard Stark, said he had seen it. He described it with his hands, high in the west, like a firefly that had learned a letter and was intent on writing it on the dark. Theon climbed the parapet and watched the horizon until the cold nibbled his ears to a sting. And then he saw it too. A pale idea of flame, too steady for foxfire, too deliberate to be accident. He did not call for alarms. He called for Farlan and for dogs. The dogs objected to the height. They have their opinions about ladders and men's ingenuity, and none of these were kind. Farlan coaxed them with gruff, insulting love, and a bitch half as clever as Osha had promised. She was sniffed the air as if reading. She did not whine. She did not bristle. She drew in, held, and then, like a man who finds a breath remains in him after he thought he had spent it, let the air out as if it tasted of salt. Farlan looked at Theon. "Yes," Theon said. "A signal or a test, or a fool. We treat it like the first two, because a fool is harmless except when you treat him like a fool and make him a weapon by accident." He stared until the light went away, and it did not go away the way a candle goes away when a housewife licks her fingers and pinches. It went as a thought goes when another thought replaces it, and you are left wondering what the first thought was but feeling that it was less important. We will have our own little private signals. No bells. Torches at the west. One lit alone is not. Hing. Too slow is men returning. 3 quick, twice, is concern. We look. 4 and a slow 5th is trouble, and we blow horns but not bells. I am not interested in giving the town a chance to panic for sport. He slept the sleep of a man who has put too many rules together in one day and dreams only of undoing them in the morning. He woke to snow, not the grand drifts of winter, but the first starch sprinkled on the cloth, the kind that makes boys put their tongues out. He walked the yard with his hood down to feel it catch in his hair and melt on his ears. Bran grinned up at him from his daily route across the flagstones and threatened him with an arrow. Theon offered in exchange the threat of more practice, and both were content. It was midday when the raven came from White Harbor. Luwin broke the seal under Theon's gaze and read it, lips moving, a scholar's priestly habit. "Lord Manderly is not insulted," he said, sounding faintly surprised, as all men sounded faintly surprised at courtesy from fat men. "He is in motion already," he says. "He has intelligence of boats moving in pairs out of 10 towers and Great Wyke. Small boats with round bottoms that do not love rough seas and therefore will cling to the coast like children to a mother's skirts. He advises that if they come, they will come angry and cold and more intent on a dry fire than a famous fight. That is a man who knows hunger in the mouth of someone who thinks himself a saint," Theon said. He discovered, amused and alarmed, that he liked Manderly very much in that moment. "We will prepare more fires than we need. Let there be flame at the gate and stew at the hall, and no way for a pointless death to be glorious if a man comes to sell his life cheap." Roderick, who had been present at the reading, grunted his assent. "We put the second lines in the yard," he said. "I would like shafts against the walls, so the first line does not stumble as it falls back." Theon nodded. He loved the old man for that quiet, cheerful acceptance that the first line must fall back. It was the sort of acceptance cowards wear as a disguise, and cowards forget to sharpen their weapons and dig wells. Roderick sharpened and dug. He was a realist with the soul of an optimist. He did not speak in banners. He spoke in stakes. That evening, the light in the west flashed again, and again the dogs breathed it like salt. Theon let the pattern repeat 2 nights more, a thing you allow when testing for a pattern so that you do not startle the hand that draws it. On the 4th night, he sent 4 men to the tall ash beyond the mill pond, and they answered the high light with a lower one. When the high light did not move but winked and then died, he felt that cold rope on his heart again. He knew that wink. He had used it, once, to signal a man with hands roughened by salt but wearing rings that ought to have been melted down for bread. Back in the Godswood. Because he had made the place his council chamber when he did not want to be counseled by any man. He sat again on the root and watched the face that was not a face. He thought of his father, and then he thought of his mother, who was a ship. He remembered her less than he remembered any sail. It seemed cruel and unkind to her to think of her as planks and a rack of ribs and a cry of men when the winds turned. But when he sought after a memory that could carry him through what was about to be asked of him, that was the image that steadied him. The sea teaches men to be very honest with their gods. He would be honest here. "If they come, let me meet them with men who do not want glory," he said into the cold. "Let me have boys with wives in the kitchens and old men with pigs who will not be moved. Give me the dullness to count what it costs to kill one of them, and then make me pay it. Make me pay it without drama." If the heart tree answered, it answered in the little creek of old wood that has survived many winters. Theon stood and walked to the pool's edge and looked down at his face until it was made strange by ripples. "I will be ruthless in the way of tally-keepers," he thought, chastened and exalted and abashed by the simplicity of it. "I will be loyal the way bread is loyal to hunger, not because of love but because it is what it is." Then he laughed softly, appreciating his own tendency to dramatize determination, and turned back to the castle where he could feel, as a man feels a hearth before he sees it, the heat of preparations. They came 2 mornings later when the light already had grown into a shape of habit, a light that spoke to partners and promised that land once touched by it would produce an answer. The answer was the dogs barking. The answer was a boy at the west post who had learned that a deep breath helps a shout carry. The answer was Farland's muttered obscenities which had the humor and purpose of prayer. The answer was Theon's hand on Bran's chair, moving him from the outer wall to the inner with a matter-of-factness that transformed care into order. The answer was Ser Roderick taking up a spear as if its weight had been his all along and calling to 2 of his old campaigners by the nicknames they had worn in their youth, and how those men stood straighter for it. 3 boats of them, and then 5, then 6. Theon watched them with a distaste that could almost have been love if love has its root in recognition. He knew their faces, not the faces themselves but the attitude that wore them. The brightness that cheap fights put in the eyes, the way hunger makes a man charming to himself. He did not pace. He watched. He measured. He waited. He did the hardest thing. He was still. The raiders pulled up where the water gave them permission. Men leaping out to drag their boats by the prow and run them onto the stones with a scraping that made Theon's teeth sing. They lit torches and hooped. They found a little hut and torched it, to have a story to tell their sons' sons when their sons' sons would be tired of hearing it the first time. They were not many. They were many enough that a village without walls was a rumor afterward. He saw with a strange and quiet gratitude that they had chosen poorly. Winterfell's town was not without walls. The walls were poor and middling and sometimes made of complaint. But the great wall behind them loomed like common sense, and that, in the end, would be the story. They advanced like men who do not believe in fresh air, packed, noisy, handsome in their way. Theon had seen northerners sneer at such men with the pride of men who consider themselves above vanity. Theon did not sneer. He simply arranged his pieces with a mind toward kind answers to ugliness. "Archers," he said softly, and the word went to the men as if they had been waiting for it under their eyelids. "Loose on the third drum." "There is no drum. You are the drum." They smiled, the boys, not because he was funny, but because the play of their minds over the instruction pleased them. He loved them in that moment. Love, it turned out, had nothing to do with kisses or flattery. It had to do with trusting a man to be obedient to the better version of himself when a hand down his back wanted him to be a beast. He waited until the raiders had their second fire made and their first had begun to tell lies to itself about what it was. Then he raised his hand and dropped it, and the arrows went up like a flock of birds who had agreed, in secret, to a signal. He had told the lads to aim at the legs. "A man with an arrow in his calf is still a father," he had said. "A man with an arrow in his head is a story. We have enough stories." Some arrows did as they were told. Some made stories. He looked away from the stories. He had learned to be meticulous in his mercy and imprecise in his cruelty. The reavers howled and rushed. The dogs, set loose at last, played their part with abandon and dignity. They lunged for hands and dragged men down by the pride, and Farland shouted hoarsely, incantations of the kennel. Theon saw a man with a long braid and a longer nose ring stumble and then right himself. He recognized the man's stride. It was very strange, then, to be looking at a version of himself from a distance and to feel nothing so much as a tiredness. They reached the lower wall, found it taller than it looked from the boats, and now the shouts changed key. Theon dropped the second hand, and the pots of sand and ash came down upon them. The oil was not plentiful. Luwin had guarded it like a dragon with accounting skills. Theon had consented to a little oil and a great deal of hot sand, and now he saw, with scientific satisfaction, how well sand performs when your enemy loves the salt as much as he thinks he does. Men danced. Men screamed. Men flung themselves onto the earth and rolled like children who have found nettles in a haystack. Theon did not rejoice. He nodded, as a man nods when he tastes a stew and finds that, unexpectedly, it is not ruined. It was not all neat. It never is. A group of 3 got hands on the lower gate's bars and heaved. The wood had been replaced in the summer and would not splinter, but a man's back is a leverage you cannot wholly prepare for. Theon saw the gate move. He did not have to say it twice. Roderick was there with his 2 old campaigners, Hound and Stick, and together the 3 of them were the sort of picture in a storybook that little boys are warned will make them cry if they ask too many questions. They braced and pushed, and Roderick sang to himself under his breath, a little nothing of a tune about barley. Theon sent 4 more. He had to force himself not to go. Leaders lead in one way or another. A boy lord on a gate is not a banner he wanted to teach today. The raiders broke, not because they were cowards, they were not, or because they were hurt, they were, but because the plan they made when the light winked did not include the kind of answer it had received. They took a few neighbors with them when they went, the way old storms take shingles off roofs in a manner more petulant than purposeful. Theon watched them go with a weariness that felt like relief's elder brother. A few bodies remained, and those stories Theon did not put away. He went to where men cried and inspected wounds with a schoolmaster's face. He put his fingers under a binding here and there to test its tightness and corrected what needed correction without ceremony. He told a man with an arrow in his thigh that he would live to complain about the weather to people who did not care. And he put his hand to the man's hair while Luwin cut the shaft. He told a boy with a bruise across his ribs from a glancing blow that he had not lost if he could still spit. And then he told him to stop spitting on his boots. They counted. They always counted now. The count was not terrible. It was not nothing. Theon made the count with Luwin at his elbow and Roderick's eyes going soft as he named the dead in his head so he could go to their wives. And he did not think of his father's count, or of the sort of count that men do on boats where people you have wronged are never there to reckon with you at supper time. At dusk, Bran announced his intention to be taken to the Godswood, and Theon, because he had been drawn there to make bargains and to test the weight of his words, found that he was glad to go. Hodder rolled the chair carefully along the path, mindful of roots as if they were sleeping hounds. Summer slipped ahead, the fur along his spine excited by the memory of smoke and the possibility of mischief. Bran's face was pale with the day's story. He looked old and then young and then himself. They sat together by the pool, a boy and a ward who had learned to be a steward and a giant who was half a poem and a wolf like a thought that has grown a body. The face in the heart tree looked over them without blessing and without curse. Theon waited. Bran did not respect the silence the god liked. You did not go to the gate, Bran said. There was accusation in it only because there was truth. The boy's eyes were a northern blue Theon had learned to bear. No, Theon said. I put men whose backs were stronger than my pride. Bran thought about that. He had become a boy who enjoyed that flavor, the savor of complicated truth. He nodded. You fight with counting. I do not know that story. I will know it. He turned his head to the carved face as if seeking confirmation that the god had marked the promise. They were Iron Men. Yes, Theon answered. The sort who prefer to meet you where you are not expecting them and where your house is not in the way. More will come, Bran said, and his voice was something older now. Theon had learned that the boy sometimes spoke like that when the wolves dreamed. He did not ask which part of Bran had spoken the words. They will come in a way that you know too well to imagine it is novel. I know, Theon said softly. I will make it boring for them. He glanced at Bran. Do you think me a coward when I say that? Bran considered him a long time. He reached to lay his hand on Theon's knee, then thought better of the formality of it and let his hand rest on the arm of his own chair. No, he said at last. I think you are a man who has a gate and intends it to be a gate twice. Twice is harder than once. They were quiet a time. Summer dreamt with his eyes open, and Theon could almost see the rabbits he chased through the thick place that was not quite this world. The evening pressed down gently upon their shoulders with the weight of blankets put by careful hands. Theon breathed the damp air and tasted, distilled there, the residue of smoke and iron and ashen stew. He felt that odd calm again, the peace that comes when you have done a thing and it is now too late to go back and do a different thing, and the memory of the first thing is not yet a lesson but only a presence. He heard a footfall and did not startle. He had expected Luwin, and Luwin it was, bent a little under the invisible ledger he always seemed to be carrying. The maester stood for a moment with them as if he too wished to claim the evening as part of his tally. Letters, he said, as if letters were people and must be announced. From Lord Manderley again, and from Riverrun. The latter is brief. The young wolf bids you hold. I intend to, Theon said. He did not move to take the letter. He did not need the witness of ink to know what he must do. What says Manderley? He sends a ship, Luwin said crisply. Small, fast, cheeky. He writes that it will harry the harriers and scratch their itch until they begin to wonder if the North has learned how to be the sea on land. His words, not mine. He has a poet in his kitchen. Theon laughed aloud at that. He wanted to love the fat lord for sending him a kitchen's poet. Good, he said. Let them be harried. Let them grow bored. Let them go somewhere else and die of somebody else's cleverness. He stood, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a cloak. Tomorrow we'll walk the river. I want to see the trash they left when they came and when they went. Men leave their names without meaning to. If we learn them, we may greet them properly next time. Bran tilted his head back, eyes half-lidded with air's fatigue and wolves' runnings. "You will not go with them if they come in peace," he murmured. It was not a question. Theon's face warmed with a heat that had nothing of fire in it. He had thought himself beyond the point where a boy could set him aflame with a single sentence. "No," he said. "My place is here. My place is to count and correct and bore enemies until they pass out from it." He drew a breath and let it out in a fog that the air stole promptly. "I say this to you now, because I may forget in an hour when a memory tells a lie to me about being larger than I am. You remind me then." Bran smiled with a mischief that made him himself again. "I will. I will be very annoying the moment you get interesting." "Gods keep us from interesting men," Luwin said primly, and they were altogether the sort of people one might have overlooked on the day before a war. A boy with a blanket over his knees, a man who had been a hostage and become a steward, a maester who counted wood by sticks and lives by lines of ink, a giant with a single word that meant 30 things depending on the hour, and a wolf who dreamed in a language everyone knew in their bones. The days after the raid were occupied with quiet things that made noise only because people do. Theon sent men to the villages along the stream with orders and with coin and with jokes meant to be remembered and used as passwords. He walked the line of the west wall and listened for the complaint of stone. He found none, and blessed builders whose names he did not know. He watched Bran grow more exact in his archery and less patient with nonsense, and he resigned himself to being the man upon whom the boy practiced his new impatiences. He wrote letters with Luwin, and he forbore to embellish his sentences with the phrases he would once have used to account for himself. He discovered, awkwardly, that he liked the plain style, in language as in life. In the kennel, Farland's best bitch whelped, and Theon knelt among the damp little lives with a grin that had nothing in it of supremacy and everything of gratitude. Osha came and spoke to them all in the old tongue, 3 words Theon had not heard and would not dare ask to have translated. And the pups wriggled as if she had told them a future that did not involve the sea. Roderick showed him how to set a field of stakes in the yard so that an enemy, in breaching the first line, would find that he had entered a mathematical problem rather than a battle. Theon copied the old man's notes and let the numbers go into him the way an oath goes in. Heavy, uncomfortable, necessary. Together they thought aloud about grain, about the way it molds if you spare it air, about the convenience of rats. He learned to admire rats again, the way he had as a boy, because they taught men about themselves. 2 young crannogmen arrived with the quiet of smoke and the humor of men who are accustomed to being thought lesser because their boots know water. They bowed shallow and gripped Theon's forearm in a way that said, wordlessly, "We know a little more than we say." They talked about paths that did not exist and about bogs that pretended to be fields. They taught Theon a way of stepping that made less noise on frosted leaves than a cat. In exchange, he taught them something they had not asked for: how to read the faces of highborn men when those men were lying to themselves. "It is a very useful skill," he said, and they believed him with relish. Eric, a boy who had once been excellent at goading pigs and now learned to drill men into a line, brought Theon news of a farmer who had been speaking seditiously about the Stark boys' inability to govern while women and maesters played dolls with duty. Theon went to the farmer himself, to Roderick's tiny dismay and Luwin's pained surprise, and found him sharpening a scythe with the confidence of long acquaintance. The farmer looked at Theon with the particular aggravation of men who consider themselves innocent of anything but thought. Theon listened longer than a younger Theon would have, then said, "There is a kind of man who believes that saying the sensible thing when there is a moon makes him braver than men under a sun. There is another kind who knows to cut his grass when it is long and keep his scythe silent because the grass grows because it grows, not because he spoke of it. Be the second kind and I will forget that you tried to be a poet." The farmer swallowed, which was the right answer. Theon left him with a loaf of bread that Luwin would have counted in his ledger as a debt to the castle and Theon counted as a debt to the day. On the 7th morning the ice clung around the puddle edges in lace, and Theon felt in his spine a change that had not been announced by bird or horn. The air was different. A man knows when the sky changes its mind. He took Osha to the river and they watched the water with the intentness of lovers trying to decipher what the other means by a look at an ankle. They found, several miles downstream, what he had suspected from the beginning and had hoped to put off discovering. A rope snag, a bit of broken plank, an odd little knot pattern he recognized from boats he had known by smell and slur. They found the place where men had pulled in to reconnoiter and then pulled away. They found, half buried in muck, a god's eye carved in a style he had seen as a boy, a thing men from Pike carved without thinking as others might whittle a bird from boredom. He tucked the god's eye into his belt and felt the heat of it against his hip, though it was cold. "I know the hand," he said, not to Osha, not to himself, not to the tree branch thrashing in the current, but to the world, to the problem, to the place that had made him and unmade him 3 times in the same decade. "They will come again. They'll come with someone who knows where a door is and where a seam is," Osha said. "They will humor themselves into thinking that they are the only clever men who ever dreamed of a castle unzipped." Theon nodded. "So we will tie the zippers." He smiled without mirth. "I will show them how much a seam may hold." Seam is a good word. The first you stitch does not hold a new jacket. But stitch 10, stitch 100, and a man believes the cloth grew that way. "Don't let them find the stitcher," Osha advised. "Kill the tailor before he brags." It was almost a week before the second visit, and in that time Theon had worked his men into tiredness that had the taste of relief. He had them practice again not the charge but the retreat in good order, and he took the jokes that the younger ones made about men who ran and wore them like practice too, letting them tease him and then turn the tease on themselves. He had them run the wall at dawn with mouths shut and mind the way their feet told them stories about stability and weakness. He had Bran sit in on 4 councils he would have been barred from last year when he fought for honors with his brother and found honor at the end fixed. He whispered with Luwin at night over maps scrawled on board with chalk, then took a wet rag to those maps himself so that no servant saw and thought to tell the wrong man a right thing. When the boats came, they came in at a different place, as he had expected. Their sails were cut low as if ashamed. Men jumped out and made a cry they thought would frighten a tree. Theon let them find the new little switches of his plan. The ditch he had ordered dug that seemed foolish until a man attempted to run through it. The hidden stakes that made falling a new verb in a man's language. The low parapet that forced them to show their backs to the archers for 1 horrible second if they wished to climb. He allowed a few to slip through where he had placed his drab heroes. Men with wives who shouted for their own names and then for others. Men who could bash with round shields and had learned not to be embarrassed by the word bash. He watched and counted and corrected. He did not watch the stories. He kept his eyes on the numbers. At one point, a man from the islands clambered onto the lower wall and grinned at him broadly, as if recognizing him across a long room. Theon recognized him too and felt, for a flash, the old deranged laughter rise in him, the laughter of a boy who sees the boys he used to drink with and knows that if he surrenders to that, he will fall as a man. He smothered it, brutally. He raised a hand. Roderick's 2 campaigners moved as if a string tugged them. Stick punched the man in the teeth with the edge of his shield and Hound's spear did work that had to be done. Theon turned away in time not to make a story of it. He did not want later to be able to tell the tale of how a man who had once given him a fish and called him little brother had been sent to whatever gods suffered Ironborn to speak to them. He wanted only to know how many arrows he had left, and where the stew stood, and if Bran had been removed to the inner porch of the hall without fuss. They broke again. They left again. They threw words like ropes behind them as they went, and Theon heard one. Turncloak. He took it and tucked it somewhere under his breastbone like a man forced to take a medicine that the doctor swears is good for the gut but tastes like poison at first sip. Perhaps, he thought calmly as he wiped sand from his palm with methodical disgust, perhaps I am exactly what they call me. Perhaps what matters is which direction you turn your cloak to. He imagined a wind, winter-smelling, snapping the cloth just so. He smiled a little. Winterfell had its wind. He was cloth. He would wear their word and make it someone else's. After, in the hall, after men had been counted and fed and told with a look that they would live, Theon slipped outside and let the cold bless his face. Osha joined him without speech, and they stood together as comrade sentries do, looking at nothing and everything. There was a sound easily mistaken for the castle breathing. It was the castle breathing, with contracts and cold. A man holds his chest tighter when the day has been long. He put his hand briefly to the stone. It was warmer than his palm for a faint second. It remembered them. He had not expected that. There were letters again. There was, surprising him in the way a door surprises when it opens onto a garden you'd forgotten existed. A small gift from Lord Manderley of smoked fish wrapped in a joke about men from the West not knowing what to do with a meal without butter. There was also a letter with no seal that had been brought by a boy whose eyes skittered like minnows. It contained 3 words in a hand he did not know. "Be careful, bro." He stared at it and felt that he had been given a stone by a stranger who believed stones to be rare. He folded the words and gave the boy a coin. He did not show the slip of paper to Lewin. He did not show it to himself after he folded it. Not for a week. He told the story of the defense to Bran with more detail than he had intended, because the boy asked clean questions and because it is a luxury not granted often to a man in the middle of a thing to be asked to explain the thing. He spoke about sand more than arrows, and about the way men fall when they are not killed and the shame of their faces afterward when they are not dead and must continue with that face. He told Bran about the men who had stood because they had wives with names. He did not speak about the man with the long nose ring. He did not speak about the word turncloak flung like a stone and caught like a darling. In the night, he woke to the sound of distant laughter. He knew it was distant because it had that quality of dreams that makes distant schematic rather than literal. He stood and walked to the window and looked out at the yard where a thin layer of snow turned every errand into an act to be remembered. The moon scraped the tower with its shear. He saw a dark figure moving where it should not be, and his heart did not leap, because he had trained it to walk when others run. He went down quietly, and he found a boy Jory not Jory, moon-drunk and boasting to himself with his shadow. He gripped the boy's collar and marched him to bed and told him, in a voice he had borrowed from men who had once marched him to bed, that he had come 1 misjudgment from death and 2 misjudgments from being used in a song. Which is worse? The boy wept. Theon put a hand on his shoulder and drew a rough circle there. After, in his own room, he sat a time in the chair, waking properly to the fact that he would now be required to be father to men who were not his blood. He did not like the thought. He did not dislike it. He accepted it the way one accepts water fetched and weight carried. The second week brought a messenger he had not expected, Lady Donella Hornwood's man riding hard with news that the wolves who wore men's skins on another banner had their teeth in the Hornwood lands already. Men of House Bolton had made a claim with a logic made of cruelty. If a house is temporarily fatherless, the nearest neighbor may adopt its coffers and lands, like a greedy ant. It was news Theon had known would come in one guise or another. He had braced himself for it. He had not braced Bran. The boy heard. The boy shook. It was not the shaking of fear. It was the trembling of a blade under whetstone, fierce with the idea that it can be more. He shouted, once, Raleigh, and then bit the shout off as if it were not his friend. He said, "We should ride," and said it in the way boys do when they have just discovered what riding means beyond 2 legs and a leash. "We should hold," Theon said, and sensed his own distaste at the phrase. He had turned hold into a vow, and now it was becoming a cage. "We will send. We will ask who can put a hand where it hurts least. We cannot be everywhere." He felt all the old coward's words, the reasonable ones, queue up behind his teeth. He hated them for being true. We have a plan for raiders who think in boats. We have no plan for men who think in flaying knives. Let us not make the mistake of being generous with our lack of plan. He worked in council with Lewin and Roderick and sent letters with wax hardening under his seal, which still startled him when he looked at it. A little symbol made flesh under pressure. He sent to Lady Hornwood what could be sent. Men who would scout, and a note with honor in it. Honor a poor comfort when bread is needed, but sometimes a bolster under a hurt back. He sent to Barrow Tun. He sent to White Harbor. He asked the Crannogmen to do what they did best. Disturb. "I cannot promise you thanks," he told them. "I can promise you stories and bad songs sung worse." They went and smiled and were water. The first snow that stayed as snow lay across the yard like a sheet. The men breathed mist and went about their business as men do when weather is a partner and not an enemy. Theon had half an hour in the morning when he did nothing but watch with a specific joy how careful work continues even when thread is numb and water stings and breath comes tight. He watched Bran shoot and miss and shoot and hit and richly mock himself for the missing. He watched Hodder plod with an ease that looked like stupidity if you did not know the religious attention he paid to each footfall. He watched Osha walk as if the ground, under the snow, contained braids she had tied with her own hands. He watched Roderick's whiskers gather frost and then release it, as if the old night were a small cloud manufacturing its own weather. He watched the place work without him and understood, with a modest, improving sadness, that a man's best successes are often the ones that make him unnecessary. On a day of gray light, a raven that no one had been awaiting dropped like a bad thought from the sky and battered its wings at the rookery window until Lewin opened and took its angry message from its angry feet. The maester read it and went pale and then controlled his skin as if it were a servant he did not intend to dismiss in public. He found Theon and handed it to him without words. The letter was from Pike, but not from the father whose hand he knew in a way he could not avoid. It was from the sister who had hands as deft as his own and twice as shrewd. Her words were few. He could feel, under them, the laugh that she would not insult him by writing. Brother, she called him, and long time, and this quaint kindness of yours to other men's sons. He read it twice and then once more and folded it with excessive care. Asha wrote that the old man had made a map full of plans that would bleed the north of its edges while Robb played at glory farther south. She wrote that there were those among the Ironborn who would rather take a city with its doors open than break their wrists on bolts, and that she thought him clever enough to prefer the doors open and the people clothed and the stew hot. She asked, without asking, whether he would meet her at a place inland where no boat could take her and talk. She told him what the map named and where and when. She made no promise to betray the family for his. She made a different sort of promise, to be honest about the choosing. She signed with a crude picture of a kraken with one of its arms tied in a knot. He held the letter and felt, not betrayal tugging at him, but possibility. He had wanted, secretly, a chance to think large in a way that did not involve charging a gate with a foolish shout. Here it was, a chance delivered by a woman who had taught him as a boy to count when he bet and to drink when he smiled at men he considered friends. He took the letter to the Godswood. He took Osha with him. He bent under the quiet of the place and offered up to it the truth he had. "I will go," he said. "I will not go alone. I will not go as a man looking to be turned. I will go as a man bearing a number in his head. The number is how many boys are in the castle who will die if I am interesting." The heart tree did not answer. It had stopped answering long before any living man had asked it anything. Osha said, "If she sends, she thinks she can have your mind. She wants it for a while and then to put it down while she goes off and uses it to tell herself a story. You know this. If you go, you must plan to leave without finishing a sentence. If you go, you must plan to be bored." "I am good at that now," Theon said. "I have practiced for 2 months." He looked up. The sky was flat. He felt like a bead on a string pulled tight. "Tell Roderick," he said. "No hiding it. He will say no. He will say no and then say, 'Go with a dozen dull men and come back with the same dozen,'" Osha said. "He will arrange to be the one who gets to tell you the conditions under which you can be brave. He is kind that way." It was as she said. Roderick objected as an old man must, then relented as a practical man does. He named the men to accompany Theon as if naming sons without the weakness of love. Lewin put food in their packs and ways to make word come back to the castle in tricks of cloth. Bran sulked at being told he could not come, then recovered dignity with a speed that made Theon proud and fearful. "I will be here when you return," the boy said, and made the simple truth sound like a deposition. They rode. A small group that moved as a larger group would move if that larger group had been hollowed out from within for the sake of speed. The snow came and went, sullen, indecisive. Theon rode at the front and felt the old joy of motion rise in him, salted, now, with responsibility. He knew where she would meet him, because she had chosen a place that could make no one else responsible for the morality of the meeting. A little copse by a creek, a twist in the land that made it possible for 2 people to see one another before their men did and to stand, if they wished, with water between them like a covenant. She was there. Of course she was. Asha did not leave men to wait unless she wished to teach them something about their patience. She sat her horse like a pirate king, which she was in every way except the tedium of titles. Her men made a circle that was not a circle until you stepped into it and found that it was. And then you wondered how you had ever thought to define circles. Theon drew up and made a show of checking his saddle strap as if uninterested in the theatrics. They looked at one another across 20 paces and a creek. "Brother," she said, and the word was both a test and a gift. "Sister," he answered, and let the weight of it do what it would do. "You invited me to be bored. I have brought 12 dull men and my new habit of counting." She laughed, bright as steel hitting stone. "You have always counted. You've simply done it aloud now and said it's mathematics rather than pride." She nodded at his men and then at her own. A small compliment of 12 also. She grinned. "We are names in a story now. The 12 and the 12 and the two fools who think blood and ink make something that does not wash." He felt a horrid sweetness for her. The sort of feeling a man has when he sees a version of himself he could have been and both envies and despises it. He shifted in the saddle and let the horse remind him of what he was doing. "You wrote about maps." "I did," she said. "My father's maps. Men love their maps because they can make kingdoms out of ink and forget that bread takes longer to draw." She lifted her chin toward the trees. "He will cut from the top down. He will take Deepwood and Bear and Winterfell last, because he likes to eat crusts before bread. He hopes Robb will never return to a loaf." Her smile did a cruel thing and then corrected itself into sadness. "He forgets that men who have been hungry grow strong in strange places. He forgets a great deal. I am not born to inherit. That does not stop my mind." "You invite me to betray him," Theon said. "I invite you to be a person and not a property," Asha replied. "Betrayal is a word men use when they are surprised you have a self. You ask a man who is already thought a traitor by everyone living to pick which banner to insult," he said. "It is not a large step, but I must name it." He beamed a little, because he had learned, at last, to enjoy the small wickedness of being precise. Asha tipped her head. "You are improved. You are worse," she added, with sisterly cruelty, because she loved him and would not let him go unstabbed. "I do not ask you to burn the castle. I ask you to keep the castle and let me have the shore between here and there. I will not take old men and I will not take children. And if a man dies fighting, I will not shit on his memory and call it a boast. I will take wood and I will take blame. I will make father think he is clever while I obey my house's law a little less obviously than he prefers." She leaned forward in her saddle. "I ask you to see that my way makes fewer ghosts." He did not answer for a long time. The creek made its little sermon. His horse stamped once and then apologized by being still. He thought about Winterfell's breathing. He thought about Bran's glance, old and young. He thought about Roderick's whiskers and Osha's knife and Lewin's ledger and Farland's dogs, and the way the winter town smelled of onions and hope. He thought about the man with the long nose ring and the word turncloak and how he had tucked it under his breastbone. He thought about Asha as a girl, dares in her eyes and kindness in her contempt. He thought about himself as a boy, laboring under the easy arrogance of a prince who had nothing to show for it but lies. "I will not open the gates," he said at last. "I will not let you take one child's bread or one old woman's bed or one iron cup that belongs to a man who will dream of it for a week if you steal it. I will not let you near the heart of the place that has kept me alive. If you want it, you must fight me and my dull men, and you will win nothing worth having from that fight. If you want the shore, you will take it no matter what I say, because that is what the shore is for. You ask mercy of me, and I will give it to the people who must live through your mercy after you have left." He met her eye and did not look away. "Do not come near the town." Asha watched him, her face torn between pleasure and annoyance in ways that were charming because they were human. "You have become something," she said, not specifying what. "I do not know if I like it." "You do," he said, because he knew her. "You do and you do not. You will go home and tell a story about the fool who turned his cloak and made it into a flag, and you will mean it kindly and cruelly by turns. I ask that when you tell it, you make me boring." She hooted. "Done," she said. "By all means, let me sing a ballad in which my brother is a stable master." She sobered as quickly as she had laughed. "Be careful, little brother. Father has more songs left in him, and some of them are hymns to stupidity." "Tell him I have more numbers," Theon said. "Tell him I have the boys count them with me." They parted without ceremony. It would not do to share bread. The symbol would make rods of men's backs. It would not do to exchange gifts. That would make of the moment something it could not support. It was enough that they had met and discovered that each held the other's childhood in custody and could, if they wished, kill it. It was enough that they chose not to. Theon rode back to Winterfell with his dull men, relieved at the dullness. He counted them as they went. He did not lift a hand when a fox crossed their path and looked up at him with a smirk that was not a smirk. He returned to the gate and saw the lanterns trimmed properly and felt, with an embarrassed gladness, the little catch in his chest that meant he had come home. He did not tell Bran about the meeting. He told Luwin and Roderick. He told them without drama, and Luwin's mouth made a line that was not disapproval and not approval, but the place where both meet to drink. Roderick grunted and chewed the inside of his cheek and pronounced, after a long consideration that took the turn of the hourglass, "We will prepare to be bored by her. This is better work than preparing to be killed clever." He sent men to the river with stakes and to the town with orders for stews. That night, Theon slept the deep sleep of a man whose muscles have spent their rage and who has only a tidy sorrow left to tidy. He dreamed not of boats or of maps but of the yard, and in his dream the target hurt when arrows struck it in tea. Hen smiled when Bran laughed. He woke to Snow's peculiar morning kindness, that blankness that gives you leave to make the day what you will. He rose, dressed, went to the yard, and set to counting. He counted everything now. He counted the smiles that greeted him, and he measured those that did not and reminded himself not to be wounded. He counted the dogs, minus the one that had died with a piece of ironborn in its mouth, and he counted the pups that wriggled against a bitch's belly as if trying to burrow back into a place where nothing is cold. He counted arrows, men, bowls, beds, roof slates, knife blades, whetstones, bowls of oats for the horses, breaths between bell tolls, the inches of ice on a bucket's lip, the days between ravens. He found immense comfort in the simple arithmetic of stewardship. When next the west showed them its light, it was not a signal but a storm, thick and gray, the kind that makes a place feel smaller under it. He watched it come and thought of a piece of ink on an old man's map and how storms do not read. He had winter to hold. He had men to make dull for their own lives' sakes. He had a boy to aggravate whenever the boy grew interesting. He had a letter in his breast with 3 words on it and a childish brotherly hope he had not been able to sand down and would not, perhaps, even if he could. He went to the godswood and told the tree nothing because he did not know how to tell it that sometimes the only prayer a man can make is to stand where he has said he will stand and to grow heavy there with the number of small acts he refuses to neglect. He put his hand to the bark and felt where men's hands had been. He breathed and made a plan for the noon and then for the hour after, and then for the unpleasant chore of speaking again in the town with the farmer who had sharpened his scythe. He smiled, thinking of something Osha had said, and he left the place that had listened so long to human laughter and weeping that it had turned those sounds into weather and knew only to be itself in reply. On the way back to the hall, he passed Bran in the yard. The boy was drawing and loosing with a concentration that would have made any man older nod. Potter hummed a little tune, contented. The arrow struck the ring. Bran did not cheer. He set another to the string. Theon paused and lifted a hand. The boy did not look away from the target, but he heard. "Good," Theon said. Again. He went on. The hall breathed. The dogs spoke to one another in brief declarations of policy. The sky made its minds up in 5 different directions. The north waited, as it always did, not for heroes but for stewards, for men who could be depended upon to be in the same place tomorrow and the day after, and who would count and count again, and in counting would keep the wolf's head turned always toward the door and its body easy beside the kin it guarded. He had chosen. He would choose again, not with a sword, mostly, but with a hand placed on a boy's arm at the right moment, with a rope pulled, with a gate checked. There was room still. He knew this as he knew his own name, for future mistakes, for dangerous grace, for cruelty made beautiful. He would try, in the meantime, to be dull enough to live. He found a scrap of ash on a sill and used it to mark on the board the number of lanterns that must be trimmed by mid-sun and the number of men to turn the meat. And he wrote it clearly so the man who read it would not squint. Then he folded Asha's letter again and tucked it deeper, and he rolled his shoulders like a man who has learned to carry something without noticing it every minute. He stepped into the noise. He took it up. He began again,